Wes Moore, welcome to Detroit and welcome to American Black Journal.
It is great to be back in Detroit and great to be with you on ABJ.
I was going to say, you come here pretty frequently now, right?
There's a lot of best practice to understand, you know, and I think that as we're thinking about our work collectively on poverty alleviation, economic mobility, educational access, I'm very deliberate about the fact that I go where good things are happening because I want to learn. And so it's that ethos has forced me to come to Detroit quite a bit, so I'm excited.
I want to talk about that work in a second, but I want to start with the book, The Other Wes Moore, which I think is this wonderful combination of a look at sort of serendipity, intentionality, luck, all of these things that make us who we are, and it really shows just how narrow the margin sometimes is between success and failure. For viewers who don't know about the book, tell us about The Other Wes Moore.
Yeah, so The Other Wes Moore really began where the day after I received the Rhodes Scholarship, the Baltimore Sun, which is my hometown paper, wrote this article.
Worked there for a long time.
Yes. Wrote this article about this local kid who had some real challenges coming up, but I was now just received a scholarship and I was going to get ready to head off to England. At the same time, they were writing a whole series of articles about 4 guys who robbed a jewelry store, and in the process of robbing the jewelry store, an off-duty police officer was murdered. There was a 13-day national manhunt for those guys, and finally on the 13th day, all 4 guys were caught. And one of the people that the police were looking for that's eventually captured and tried and convicted and sentenced for the crime was a guy whose name was also Wes Moore. And so what I did with this book was just tell the story of the journey of these 2 boys and what ended up happening that causes this split. And so you're absolutely right. I mean, where it's luck, it's opportunity, it's structure. And I remember someone said, is it nature or is it nurture? Is it what is it? And the answer is it's both. Right? We cannot talk about societal responsibility without understanding that at the end of the day, these are individual decisions that people are making that have to be held to account for. However, we cannot talk about individual responsibility without understanding that those decisions are being made in a societal context. The societal context that we've created, that we've intentionally created in many cases, are now breeding the type of decisions that people turn around and make. It
chooses winners and losers well before individual decision enters the picture.
That it's so true, and our ability in our society where we have become so miserly with the way that we apportion opportunity inside of our society. I mean, I think about if you tell me that a child is born today, it breaks my heart and should keep all of us awake. The fact that if you allow me to ask 7 questions.
I can tell you what's going to happen.
I can tell you what's going to happen to that child, to the child that's born today. So we're talking about things that child is not at all responsible for. But basic questions of, tell me the zip code they're born into. Tell me about their family situation. Tell me what school they're going to go to. Basic questions. That should not be the case.
And for you, obviously, things went in a different direction because of structure, because of intentionality. Talk about how that sits with you. I've always been curious, the personal connection between the 2 of you. To think that if not for the people who were around you, if not for the choices that got made on your behalf, you might be him. That's gotta sit with you really heavily. I
believe deeply the chilling truth is that his story could have been mine. The tragedy is that my story could have been his. And so it was the people that both of us had in our lives that helped to either make sense or make nonsense of what was going on in our own individual lives. And I'm thankful for the fact that between my mom, we were both raised by single moms.
By single mothers,
but my mom, that my grandparents were helpful. I had aunties and uncles, who were always, who were there to be helpful and supportive. And it wasn't like our family was perfect. And I think I lay that out in the book and in the story, that it wasn't like we were all perfect. But what happened was it allowed space for decisions to be made and second chances to be able to be embraced. And with Wes, I think about the fact that even as he was coming up, there was a point when second chances become last chances. And the structural impediments and the individual decisions that were then being made and the people who were surrounding had significant impacts on where he ended up to this day.
Yeah, we're talking a lot this year about the 50th anniversary of the Kerner Commission being released a year after the rebellion here and several other cities exploding in tumult. And your book has come to mind a couple of times for me as, gosh, I don't know, a warning or a sign of how far we've come and how far we haven't, right?
Yes.
In that one book, the two of you really show what's changed in that 50 years and what hasn't.
So, literally 5 years to the day that The Other Wes Moore was published, Baltimore had its uprising
over Freddie Gray, right? Yeah.
5 years to the day that The Other Wes Moore was published, Baltimore was on fire.
Yeah, wow.
And so we think about this idea that history has an uncanny way of repeating itself and getting worse if we're not actually learning from it.
We're not doing it differently to avoid repeating it.
If you want different, do different.
Yeah.
And so we now as a large society have to ask a question. Are we willing to do what it takes to do different?
Yeah. Right.
You know, we all say we want different.
Right.
But if you want different,
what does
do
that
different.
look like?
What does that look like?
Yeah.
Doing a better job of apportioning opportunity fairly within our society.
Right.
Doing a better job of making sure that we are thinking critically about economic mobility in all communities and not just certain communities or in subsections.
Yeah.
Thinking about educational assets and educational priorities, about how we think about education from a long-term and a full life cycle for our individuals and for our families and for our kids. These are things that we have to be deliberate about. And if not, then a lot of history's worst moments will simply
come back and visit us again,
and show themselves again.
Right. I want you to talk about the Robin Hood Foundation and your work there, because I think that, of course, dovetails very nicely with what you're talking about, this idea of structural opportunity, changing the way we think about those things.
Yes. And you know, and so the Robin Hood Foundation is a foundation that's been around for 30 years. It's one of the largest poverty fighting organizations in the country with a sole focus on poverty alleviation and economic mobility. Right. So whether it is education, housing, immigration, criminal justice reform, health, wherever poverty shows itself either as a causal relationship or a correlation, Robin Hood will be there to fight it. But I think one of the most fascinating things that I've really had a chance to fully embrace in this work is Robin Hood, again, is one of the largest in the country. It's still a fraction of our ability to be able to impact the change that we all want to see. There is not enough philanthropic dollars in the country to be able to combat against bad policies and to be able to combat against structural challenges. And so one of the things I really loved and embraced about the work of Robin Hood is the ability to go and identify where best practices are, the ability to be able to go fund innovative social entrepreneurs, innovative concepts and ideas that actually can measurably and permanently move families out of poverty. But it's also being able to understand that the power of Robin Hood and all foundations is not necessarily its purse. The power of foundations is its voice. It's the fact that it can and should have an opinion when these issues are being debated and discussed, because the type of dollars and the type of structure we're talking about on the government front are completely dwarf anything else that from the foundation community that we can do, regardless of the millions or the hundreds of millions that organizations and foundations can give away.
You know, I had a conversation with someone recently who said, this was someone who is spending a lot of those dollars right now, trying to push back, trying to send things in a different direction. He said, you know, if we had spent this money 50 years ago on structural change, it would have been less. And it certainly would have had better outcomes. We sort of blew it by not taking advantage of that opportunity, and now we're in a mop-up phase in some ways.
Remediation is terribly expensive. And whether you're talking about on the educational front, whether you're talking about on the social services front, whether you're talking about the criminal justice front, remediation is terribly expensive. And so how we then think about putting money on the front end, how we truly think differently about the type of measurements that we're actually aiming for, how we can think about preventative, preventative forms of intervention.
Right.
That is going to matter deeply on our ability to have any form of resource or just mind space to be able to impact large-scale structural challenges.
You know, I often wonder also about the current political climate and the debates that we're having. Is that an opportunity? I mean, all of a sudden you have a lot of people, I think, who are more aware of the gaps, of the deficits, of the lack of opportunity that's around. Some of them are maybe making bad decisions about who they're voting for or who they're supporting, but that awareness, if we can capitalize on it, maybe is an opportunity in itself. Do you feel like that's happening?
I feel like it's a huge opportunity. And listen, I think that regardless of what someone thinks about the current administration or the president or whatever like that, there's something that we all have to appreciate and understand, is that the thing and the emotion that he tapped into is real. It's real. The level of disillusionment, the level of frustration that far too many people and far too many families feel, that's real. And it doesn't just exist in one portion of the country. It doesn't exist in one section or one segment. It's something that I don't care if you're talking about, the Ozarks, and I don't care if you're talking about Baltimore. It is.
There's a bond. There's a commonality there that.
That's right.
Maybe we can get people to recognize.
That's right. Whether you're talking about the UP or whether you're talking about, Detroit.
Inner city Detroit.
Inner city Detroit, right? And so I think the thing that we have to be able to catalyze, and the thing we have to be able to understand, is that it's not just the rhetoric, it is the policies that have a distinct impact on our ability. And the fact is, it is far too easy for people to fall into poverty. It's far too complicated to get people out, right? These are policy challenges. And so it does actually present a unique opportunity where we can have interesting and cross-sectional conversations about things like criminal justice, about things like economic opportunity and parity, about things like wages, where oftentimes the pitch becomes so loud that we're not able to get together and collaborate opinions and points of views and perspectives. But I think what's happening right now is, whether you are dealing with the issue of poverty in a rural setting, dealing with the issue of poverty in an urban setting, dealing with the issue of poverty on the East Coast, West Coast, or in the middle, we know there is collective action that we can and must do to be able to say, we are not going to be patient anymore when it comes to dealing with the issue of economic mobility.
Okay, Wes Moore, always good to see you.
It's always good to see you.
Come back to Detroit soon.
I will, I promise that. It's always good to see you. Thank you.
Thanks for being here.